Okay, so sorry about two today, but I didn't want to risk my life. So, did anybody show up? Well, that's good. So today we're going to start chapter 3, weighted voting. The most common place to see this is, well, the example I give here, corporate shareholder meeting. Each shareholder's vote counts proportion to the amount of shares they have. An individual with 1 share gets the equivalent of 1 vote, while someone with 100 shares gets the equivalent of 100 votes. This is called weighted voting, where each vote has some weight attached to it. Yes. Yes. So the notations we use in our vocabulary, each individual or entity casting a vote is called a player. They're often denoted as P1, P2, P3, all the way to Pn, where N is the total number of voters. Each player is given a weight, which usually represents how many votes they get. The quota is the minimum weight needed for the votes, or the weight needed for the proposal to be approved. A weighted voting system will often be represented in the shorthand form Q, which is the quota, and then the weights of player 1, player 2, and player 3. Q is the quota, player 1 is the weight for player 1, and so on. Easy, right? Now, one of the issues that I have in this chapter is when you answer a question and it's supposed to be player 1, you give me the weight of player 1 instead. And usually I can translate it and go ahead and give you credit. But if it's asking which player is this or which player is that, your answer should be P1 or P2, or even player 1, player 2, whatever. But not the weight. It can get confusing. So in a small company, there are 4 shareholders. Mr. Smith has 30% ownership stake in the company. Mr. Garcia has a 25% stake. Mrs. Hughes has a 25% stake, and Mrs. Lee has a 20% stake. They're trying to decide whether to open a new location. Company bylaws state that more than 50% of ownership has to approve any decision like this. This could be represented by the weighted voting system, and it has to be more than 50%. So we have a quota of 51. And then Mr. Smith's 30%, we represent as a weight of 30, and then weight of 25 and 25 and 20. Now, there are some issues that we have to keep in mind with the quota. The quota has to be more than half the total number of votes. And the quota cannot be larger than the total number of votes. So if I have, in this case, I have, when I add up the weights, it comes to 100. I can't have a quota of 101. It would never be reached. Okay, this example here, in a committee, there are 4 representatives from management and 3 representatives from the workers' union. For a proposal to pass, 4 of the members must support it, including at least 1 member of the union. Find a voting system that can represent the situation. Now we have 4 members. We have 4 management and 3 union. So we have, essentially we have management 1, management 2, management 3, management 4, and union 1, union 2, union 3. It doesn't say anything about weight, but it says we need a quota. There's 7, so we're going to need at least 4. And one of them has to be one of the workers' union. So we could possibly do management 1, management 2, management 3, and union 1. That would pass, right? A little confusing because it kind of veers away from what we were initially talking about. Okay, so now we get to some more terms. You're going to want to remember these. Again, you won't have to memorize definitions, but you need to remember what is what. A player will be dictator if their weight is equal to or greater than the quota. So if player 1 can pass it by themselves, they're a dictator. The dictator can also block any proposal from happening. In other words, the other players cannot reach quota without the dictator. So if you have to have them and they can pass it by themselves, they're a dictator. As opposed to the next one, which is a player has veto power if their support is necessary for the quota to be reached. If it is possible for more than one player, it is possible for more than one player to have veto power or for no player to have veto power. So a dictator and veto power are slightly different. A dictator is somebody with veto power that can pass it on their own. Veto power is somebody that it can't pass without them, but they can't pass it on their own. Then a player is a dummy if their vote is never essential for a group to reach quota. So let's look at this voting system here. Our quota is 16. So are there any dictators? Is there anybody that has 16 or greater weight? Our weights being 7, 6, 3, 3, and 2. Anybody whose weight is 16 or more? So there are no dictators. And what about veto power? I need 16, right? So let's look at player 1 here. Can I pass it without player 1? What do we have? 6 plus 3 plus 3 plus 2, which is 14, which is not greater than or equal to 16. So that tells me it cannot pass without player 1, which means that player 1 has veto power. If player 1 says no, it's not passing. So now let's look here at player 2. Can it pass without player 2? I have 7 plus 3 plus 3 plus 2, which is 15. Still not enough. So player 2 also has veto power. Now look at player 3. I can pass it without player 3, right? 7 plus 6 plus 3 plus 2, that's 18. Same with player 4. It's 7 plus 6 plus 3 plus 2 again, 18. And also player 5, because I have 7 plus 6 plus 3 plus 3, which is 19. So player 1 and player 2 are the only two with veto power. That makes sense? So looking at these three possibilities that can pass. Actually, no, that's not what I want to do. So we know we need player 1 and player 2. Do I need player 3? This being 13. I need 16. I need 3 more. Do I have to have player 3? Now, if I have player 3, it'll pass. So player 3 can affect it. So player 3 is not a dummy because it can affect it. If I add player 3 to that, it'll pass, and thus it can be affected. Same with player 4, which has the same weight as player 3. Now, what about player 5? Player 5 is 2. If I just add that, I have 15, which is not enough. And then if I use one of the other ones instead, I already have 16. So player 5 doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what player 5 does, so player 5 is a dummy. Any questions on how we did that? We started off, since player 1 and player 2 have veto power, they have to be part of any winning coalition. And then we figure out if we can pass it without having any of the other 3. So we determined that we could pass it with 1, 2, and 3, player 1, 2, and 3. We figured we could pass it with player 1, 2, and 4. We couldn't pass it with players 1, 2, and 5. And if we add another player, we don't need player 5, and therefore player 5 is a dummy. Their vote doesn't matter. Don't tell them that, okay? Any questions? Okay, let's look here. Have the voting system with a, we're going to use various quotas. Which players are dictators? Which have veto power? And which are dummies? So first one says use a quota of 10. I'm looking at this. Do we have any dictators? Player 1 is a dictator. Anybody have veto power? Essentially, if you have a dictator, you have a veto power. Can it pass without player 1? Now, that may not always be the case as far as dictator and veto power, but because if I had another player over here, player 2, well, technically they wouldn't be a dictator either because it can be passed without them. Player 1 is. Does it matter what player 2 and player 3 do? It goes as player 1 says. So both of them are dummies. Okay? And it says do this with a quota of 12. Now, do I have any dictators? Nobody has a weight of 12, right? So there's no dictators. Now, starting off looking at player 1. Do I have to have player 1 in order for this to pass? Yes. So player 1 has veto power. How about player 2? Do I have to have player 2 for it to pass? Don't have to have them. So they're not, doesn't have veto power. Because 1 and 3 would be enough. Player 1 and player 3 would be enough. Same with player 3. I don't have to have player 3 pass it if player 2 passes. So my only person with veto power is player 1. What about dummies? Is there anybody that doesn't matter? No, because we can pass it with player 1 and player 2, so player 2 is not a dummy. We can pass it with player 1 and player 3, so player 3 isn't a dummy. So there are none. And then last, let's go with the quota of 16. 10, 5, 3. So any dictators? Okay. What about veto power? Is there anybody that we cannot pass it without them? Are you sure? Well, it's definite it can't pass with player one. We also need player two. Because if player two doesn't do it, we have 13. If player one doesn't do it, we have 8. What about player three? If player three doesn't do it, we only have 15. So actually, all 3 of them have veto power, which would then imply that there are no dummies. Everybody's needed. We actually have to have all 3 of them. Any questions on this? Okay, now we'll talk about coalitions and critical players. A coalition is any group of players voting the same way. You hear a lot of this when they talk about politicians, in particular Congress, the different coalitions they have. Coalition is a winning coalition if the coalition has enough weight to meet quota. Definition of a word has the word in it twice more. And a player is critical in a coalition if them leaving the coalition would change it from a winning coalition to a losing coalition. Let's see what they have for us here. So, Scottish Parliament in 2009, there were 5 political parties. 47 from Scottish National Party, 46 from the Labour Party, 17 from the Conservative Party, 16 from the Liberal Democrats, and 2 from the Scottish Green Party. Typically, all representatives from the party vote as a bloc. So the parliament can be treated like the weighted voting system. Have a quota of 65, 47, player 1, 47, player 2, 46, player 3, 17, player 4, 16, and player 5, 2. Now consider the coalition player 1, player 3, player 4. No 2 players alone could meet the quota. So all 3 players are critical in this coalition. If any one of them drops out, it's no longer a winning coalition. In the coalition player 1, player 3, player 4, player 5, anybody but player 1 could leave the coalition and it would still meet quota. So only player 1 is critical. So the critical player is the player that puts it over the top and keeps it there. If they drop out, it becomes a losing coalition. Can be more, can be all of them. Can be just one of them. Oh, yeah. Then we reiterate this is for coalitions. Dictators, veto dummies, and critical players. A player is a dictator if the single player coalition containing him is a winning coalition. Same principles, but we're talking about coalitions now. Player has veto power if they are critical in every winning coalition. A player is a dummy if they are not critical in any winning coalition. So calculating the Banzhaf Power Index. First thing is to list all winning coalitions. So here there's only 2, right? Player 1 and player 2, and player 1 and player 3. And each coalition identify the players who are critical. Well, I guess we could say player 1, player 2, player 3 as well. So in this one, if 1 drops out, it drops. If 3 drops out, or 2 drops out, it drops. So they're both critical. Okay? Same thing here. And this, I have exactly 8. So if player 1 drops out or player 3 drops out, they're both critical. And the third one here, the only player that's critical is player 1. And if player 2 drops out, I still have player 1 and player 3, which is 8. If player 3 drops out, I have player 1 and player 2, which is 9. Now, count how many times each player is critical. Player 1 is critical 3 times. Player 2 is critical 1 time. Player 3 is critical 1 time. Convert these counts to fractions or decimals by dividing by the total times any player is critical, which is 3 plus 1 plus 1, 5. So this would be 3/5, 1/5, and 1/5, and it should add up to be 1. That is our power index. The interesting thing about this is it never tells us what it means. This shows us a way to do it. The other interesting thing about this is it's not on a test. This, however, is a sequential coalition lists players in order in which they join the coalition. A pivotal player is the player in a sequential coalition that changes the coalition from a losing coalition to a winning one. Notice there can only be one pivotal player in any sequential coalition. So we have a weighted voting system. We have a quota 8. We have player 1 with a weight of 6. Player 2 with a weight of 4. Player 3 with a weight of 3. And player 4 with a weight of 2. In the weighted coalition system, which player is pivotal in this sequential coalition? So that means player 3 comes first. Player 3 says, yeah, I'll pass it. I agree. Let's do that. So player 3 has a weight of 3, which is not 8. So it's not passed yet. Then we have player 2, who says, yeah, sure, I agree. This is a good idea. So player 2 has a weight of 4. So now my total weight is 7. Still not enough. I need 8 or more. So then player 4 comes in with a weight of 2, which gives us a weight of 9. So now I have enough. So player 4 is the pivotal player. Everybody follow that? Okay, here's another one. If you want to look into this, it is in the textbook. I didn't realize that was such a short chapter. So that's that for that chapter. So unfortunately, this puts us a week ahead again. I tried to have us miss a day so we could get a little closer to where we're supposed to be. Here's what I'm thinking. So Tuesday is what, the 31st? And Thursday is Groundhog Day. And then the next Tuesday is the 7th. And then we have Thursday, the 9th. Now, for those of you that are supposed to be in class, This is the day we're originally scheduled to take the exam. What I'd like to do is this. Tuesday, go ahead and go over homework / study guide. Okay? Thursday, test number 1, test number 1. What I mean by this is you can take the exam on Thursday, the 2nd, or Tuesday, the 7th. So if you come and take it on Thursday, the 2nd, you don't have to be here Tuesday, the 7th. If you think you need more time, you can wait till Tuesday, the 2nd to take it. You just have to be here one of those 2 days to take the exam in class. Those of you that are in the strictly online classes, I'm just going to keep the schedule the same as it is. I believe it's the 12th that it's due by. And then here I'm going to start the apportionment chapter. Because after that chapter, we'll go over the project for this course. Anybody have any issue with doing this? So it looks like you're going to get another day off. And you get to choose which one. Let's not recording.